Okay, so we ended the last video talking about a movement along the demand curve, and that's what we're going to be revisiting today. Again, just to remind ourselves, we're talking about the buyer side of the market, and we're just going to have a quick recap over the different things that we talked about. So we're talking about a movement along the demand curve. So what's the demand curve? Well, the demand curve represents all the different combinations of price and quantity demanded. So what I mean by that is all the different combinations of the amount of a good that people buy and the price at which they buy them, okay? And when we're talking about demand or any factor in economics, we've already talked about this, but the idea of ceteris paribus is very important. And it means everything else has remained the same, all else equal, nothing else has changed. So when we're talking about a movement in this video, just remember, we're saying only price has changed, and we're analysing the effect, we're isolating the effect of a change in the selling price of the good itself on how much people buy of that good. We're analysing the change in the selling price, the effect of the change in the selling price of the good itself on the quantity demanded. Now, we talked about the law of demand, and we said that the law of demand states that with other factors held constant, nothing else has changed, ceteris paribus, an increase in the price of the good or service leads to a decrease in the quantity demanded, or a decrease in the price of a good or service leads to an increase in the quantity demanded of that good. So we have to learn how to draw a demand curve. So we have two lines, two axes. Price is on this one, the vertical one, and the quantity demanded is on the horizontal one. We have a downward sloping demand curve showing the law of demand, and we're going to express that again. So when you have a price, and remember this is a general case, we have the price P1. Well, how do we find the quantity demanded? Well, you know, we don't know any numbers here, but we're saying in general, you go straight out to the demand curve, touch it, go straight down, and you have quantity bought Q1, quantity demanded Q1. And what we're saying here is that if price falls to P2, we're going to go straight out to the demand curve, straight down, and we see Q2 is greater than Q1. Why? Because it's further to the right than Q1 is. So as price falls, quantity demanded increases. As price falls, people buy more of that particular good. Alternatively, and I know this is a recap and maybe annoyingly so for some of you, but as price rises, quantity demanded falls. As price rises, that means people buy less of the good. So we've already said this, we've shown it a few times. The law of demand tells us that the quantity demanded, the amount that people buy, depends on the price of the good. That's what quantity demanded means. When the price of the good changes, this is known as a movement along the demand curve. And just to be clear, no other factor can cause a movement. A movement along the demand curve, which is what we're going to show now in a second, we've seen it anyway, but we're going to show it again more explicitly, is only ever caused by a change in the selling price of the good itself. Only a change in the selling price of the good itself can cause a movement. Please keep that in mind. So what we have here is a downward sloping demand curve. It's going down from left to right, showing that it obeys the law of demand. Because if it had a different slope, it wouldn't really be obeying the law of demand. If it didn't go downward, if the slope wasn't downward, it wouldn't be obeying the law of demand. So what we're saying is, as price falls down to P2, we go straight out, touch the demand curve, straight down, we get Q2. We see that demand, quantity demanded, has increased, okay? But what has happened? Has the demand curve itself changed? No, it has not. We have moved down the existing demand curve because the price has changed. Hence, we've moved down the demand curve, so it's called a movement. So a movement is only ever caused by a change in the selling price of the good itself. Ceteris paribus, everything else remained equal. The demand curve itself has not changed. We have moved along the existing demand curve from here down to here. That's a movement down the demand curve. A movement up the demand curve is caused by an increase in the selling price of the good itself. Again, the demand curve itself has not moved or changed. We have moved from this point here up the existing demand curve to this point here. Now, what causes a movement? I hope you're sick of me saying this because you know it so well. A movement is only ever caused by a change in the selling price of the good itself. Ceteris paribus, everything else remains unchanged. So we've moved up the existing demand curve from this point along the demand curve up along to this point here.